Introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bao Tran. I'm a patent attorney. I've been here in Silicon Valley for over 20 years, and I've helped startups. We can share with you how to increase and protect your company via the intellectual property system.
What is the first step for you when you look at a startup?
For a startup, we look at different stages in the life of the company. If it's a one-man person with an idea, we recommend using a provisional patent application to lay the foundation in place in a low-cost manner. As the company matures with different iterations, we lay in a series of application that protects the pivot that the founder has done. And in that way, we help the company refine the scope of protection in a way that's cost effective.
Awesome. How do you start with a company? What are your strategies for identifying an idea that needs protection or an idea that needs a patent?
You tell a company to look at the marketing material that it releases. So the marketing material points in specific features that are important to the customers, features that distinguishes the company from the competition. So you can use that as a starting point to figure out how to protect the things that are important to the company. There are also items that are not mentioned in the marketing literature that's also still important, but those we can get through talking with the engineers or the founder, and we can say, hey, what are some of the critical things that you've done that other people coming after you must also solve to create the product? That tells me where the roadblocks that we need to protect for the company. So you can approach it from two ways. One is from the customer driven approach, the features that are important to the customer. And the second is from the bottom up, where how do you build a system and what are the challenges associated with creating a functional system. Whoever is doing a follow-up or a clone approach of the startup's products, they are likely to face the same problem. If we block that, we have given the company a very good head start.
Earlier, you mentioned a provisional patent application. What is that and why is that important?
The provisional application is an informal way of establishing an early priority date. Some people have taken it to literally just dumping in the engineering notes. That's one way of thinking about a provisional. We recommend a more refined approach to that. On one extreme, you can be very informal, and on the other extreme, like a drug company, they prepare a provisional application as though it is a non provisional, i.e., a case that's going to get examined. In a provisional application, within 1 year, you must convert that into a non-provisional. The way the drugs company do it correctly is they create the application in a shape that at the end of the 1 year period, when you convert them, all they do is drop the same copy, and now it is converted from a provisional to a non-provisional. There's no
Okay.
variance at all. All the details are there at the beginning. So why do they do
Okay.
this? They want to gain an extra year of life. That extra year of life for a medical device company or a drug company can be worth billions of dollars. That's the proper way of doing a provisional application. Most people don't go through all that because it's very expensive to do a non provisional. They use a provisional as a mechanism to collect all the notes and get an early priority date. I think the right answer is somewhere in between. You want something that's detailed enough that when you convert from a provisional into a non provisional, all the details are there. What you don't want to
Right.
do is to create a single page provisional, and then a year from now, I'll be writing a patent application for you that's 50 pages, and people are going to look at it and say, wait a minute,
Okay.
you file a one page provisional and now it's 50 pages. Something is missing here. Things
Yeah.
in between. You're not entitled to that provisional date. You want to have that balance between cost and detail and formality. The way the drugs company do it is the right way to do the provisional, which is to extend the life of their patent protection by another year. Many startups that lack money do it basically on the back of an envelope, and that is not the right approach. So I suggest something in between. You don't need to spend the money to write up a formal patent application, but you should have a lot of details in it. So focus on the details when you submit the information for a provisional patent application.
What details would you want to would include in your provisional application.
The provisional is not a legal document, it's a technical document. So I would dump all the engineering information into that. Eventually, the provisional application is going to become a public document. So you don't want to be putting your raw stuff into there. You need to filter it out. What you need is sufficient details so that another engineer in the same space could implement this. I.e., think of it like it's a specification for a third party designer or manufacturer. If you have that detail, they can build it. That's the test. Is there sufficient information for somebody skilled in your area to read it, understand it, and implement the
I guess if we were talking about competitors, what's to say that a competitor couldn't patent something ahead of you and beat you to the punch?
They can always do that, but that's the same question as to why startups exist. They exist because they see a niche that the big companies won't go there, right? And they're flexible enough to take that risk. So I think the short answer is big companies can go there if they are directed to go there. But for startups, big companies exist to serve the big markets. Startups tend to serve niches or emergent technologies. The market size is so small, a big company will never be able to solve that economically. They won't serve that economically. They'll leave it alone until it grows sufficiently large. When it's large enough, they will enter the space because they will use their size to their advantage. But if you have a market that's just brand new and is maybe $10 million in total market size, that's not worth it for an IBM to
Makes
come in.
sense.
That leaves room for startups to build on their early development in that space. They gain familiarity, and it's a cycle. They'll start running faster and faster, and then people think of their solution versus the big company. And so, what would a big company do at that point? They can either build it in house or buy you. Your objective is to grow to a point where you either compete with them head on as a public company or you sell to that company and make everybody wealthy.
What would you say are some ways that you can stay ahead of the competition?
Inventors are nimble and see the need for a new product. Even though if it's a small market size, they can economically serve that. So the proper space for founders and for startup is to focus on new concepts, on new ways of solving an existing problem, doing it cheaper, faster, better. For a founder, you also need to fail fast. If your proposed solution is not working out, not enough traction, you need to pivot and change. When you pivot sufficiently, you eventually will find your market and then you can build on that. Raise money from investors to scale your growth. That's also the point where you do heavy patenting to protect your moat and prevent others from exploiting what you spent years learning. Knowing what not to do is as important as knowing what to do. Once you find out what to do, you patent it because that will give you room to grow your business while other people are catching up to you.
Okay. When you're looking at a startup, what are the vital components of a team to define your strategy in terms of ideas and protecting them?
Selecting your legal help team, you need to balance between a big firm or a small firm. One advantage of the big firm is they have the brand name. The downside is they have big clients. For those big clients that are substantial chunks of the revenue, they're going to be putting their best people into those teams. You, as a startup, as a one man startup, you are going to get the new junior attorneys that are being trained. You should not be the guinea pig for a new associate to learn how to do patent application. I suggest that you look for smaller, specialized boutique firms with the right attorneys, with the right technology know-how, as well as the legal experience. When you work with people that knows the technology and knows how to navigate the patent office, you can get your patent much faster and inexpensive. That's the way you balance the cost.
How do you work with IP strategy teams or R&D teams?
Most startups start with one person, right? So start working with founders. And those are the one with the most creative juice in the whole company. Then as the company scales up, you'll start going into the nuts and the bolts of how do you improve the production rate? How do you make something more efficient? How do you make it slightly better for the customer to use? So then you start bringing in engineering teams. Founders are typically patent savvy already, but the engineering team may not be. So you need systems and processes in the company with a culture that values IP protection, so that whenever they've done something neat, they want to raise it up to management so that it could be protected. The other part I found is often engineers think, oh, I have to report this to management, a new invention. That's too much work. What you want to do is create a culture where you celebrate those kind of successes by giving them a small reward or you don't recognition. You can have a team meeting and say, hey, congratulations. Today we file a new application based on Mr. Jones' great idea. Recognition and reward for inventors, I think, is an important component as the company scales. When the company is small, that's not an issue because everybody should be tightly rowing together and recognizing things that should be protected as assets. Remember, patents are assets, not expenses.
Let's say now you have this patent. What does it enable you to do? How does it protect you?
Patents can increase your company valuation and protect your go to market. Typically, well, when you come up with a new idea, you write up your pitch deck or your business plan, right?
Hmm.
And you'll talk to an investor first. And if you're inexperienced, ask the investor to sign a confidentiality agreement. But that's the wrong thing to do because most investors won't sign it. They talk to many people, right? So there's two ways you can solve this problem. Don't talk to the investor at all, or you protect yourself with patent first, and then you can talk to the guy with a more relaxed attitude. Of course, you're not going to reveal everything. You
Hmm.
certainly now talk at top level what the business level is about, what's the advantages, the features, and how you achieve that. So you can talk to an investor in a more comfortable way. It's the same thing you can do with your suppliers, contractors, or employees. You don't have to be so secretive. Your employees. Patents help set the foundation so that you can operate in a more comfortable manner. Number two, they help increase the company valuation because they are assets.
Hmm.
And look, a typical patent application is about $10,000. But you tell an investor that a patent is worth at least $250,000 or even $1 million. People aren't going to dispute you. They hear plenty of stories about a drug company patent being worth billions. So the fact that you claim $250,000 or $1 million, that they're really not going to object to that. And so, for a small amount, $10,000 investment, now you have bootstrapped it to 25x return. Now, most investors, they invest in you expecting a 10x return.
Yeah.
So if you invest 10,000 and you get a 225x return, that's a very good investment.
How can a patent open up new revenue streams, or what value can a patent bring to a company or startup?
So the patent expands the ways that you can commercialize the technology. You can partner up with other companies using the technology. Let's say you are a startup and you want to join up with a public company with patents. You can level that playing field. Number one, you can use it for partnership. Number two, if you are not using the invention, you could sell the patent or you could license it out and you get to keep the royalty, typically 5 to 10%. So that's pretty good return on investment if you get 5%, 10% of the sales, right? Another way, if you have sales, you can use the patent as asset from which you can borrow money from. Borrowing money is a much cheaper way to get capital than to get an investor because when an investor comes in, they get a huge chunk of your company. If you can convince people to lend you money to grow, it's much better than to sell equity. There are
Okay.
multiple ways that you can benefit from having a good patent portfolio.
Okay. Okay. I get what's the optimal timing for a startup to start filing patent? At what point in the ideation process do you want to start looking at patents?
So when you first come up with the idea, you probably should do a provisional application. Now, the quality of that provisional may be low because you just came up with the idea, so it might be very slim. But what you want to do is iterate on that. Sit down and think through all possible implementations of this. On top of that, you want to think, are there any uses outside of your immediate use? So perhaps maybe if you thought of some idea in the educational space, are there applications of that in the banking space, for example? And
Mm.
then you also want to think about all possible ways of implementing this. By doing that, you have a 360-degree view of the invention. You file out a provisional, fairly inexpensive to get started. And the next step is you're going to start looking for angel investors. You're going to look for a co founder. When you talk to those people and customers, you would add additional important concepts to serve those customers. You just iterate for a few months, maybe 3 to 6 months. And by then, you'll come up with a minimum viable product. You might want to think seriously about doing a formal patent application because now you're getting very close. Maybe you're 90% of the way there. You should lock that in with a patent application, and that's roughly the 1 year time frame for converting from a provisional to a non-provisional. At that point, you're probably going to be raising your seed round now, right? And of course, the more money you have, the more resource you're going to have, the more innovations you're going to come up with because you're going to find ways how you can do things better than the original solution that you came up with. So
Yeah.
after you continue this process and then you finally launch the product, if you haven't done a provisional by a non-provisional application by then, this is the time to do a non-provisional before you launch the product because that is for sure something that's going to the market. It's stable, it's working, right? And of course, after that, you continue the process as you steamroll your way to success. So that's a roadmap of how you can build a portfolio in a logical, systematic manner.
How granular should these patents be? Do you want to get really specific with them, or do you want to have them cover a bigger picture?
You are a combination of big picture applications and low level details. So when I was with a big orthodontic company, they use retainers to move teeth. They had technologies on 3D scanning of your teeth, and they call it intraoral scanning. They also have 3D printing technologies where they fabricate the retainers. They also have dental CAD patents where they manipulate your teeth so that they can fabricate the 3D models. Those are specific tangible details. What we found out was that the most important patent was actually the overview series of computer fabricated a bunch of numbers on retainers. What's so novel about that? No one's ever done that before. And it held back the competition. Even if you can come up with different ways of doing your retainer fabrication, you couldn't sell it because you couldn't have the proper sequence indication. So people might not be wearing it in the right sequence. That's an example of how a high level patent application is important in addition to all the details of how do you do your intraoral scanning, you do your 3D print fabrication, how you do your computer aided design of your teeth. All of those details are important as well. So I recommend a combination.
Are patents 10 times more likely to get funded?
Well, I don't know if it's 10 times more likely to get funded, but certainly you would have an advantage. The reason why is that investors know that you've thought through the issues and that you're going to protect their investment with a barrier to entry. The barrier to entry is not insurmountable. Anybody with enough resources can design around your invention. This reminds me of the story of two people being chased by the bear. You don't have to be the fastest runner. You just have to be faster than the other person. When you have a patent, you are creating a barrier that other people have to design around to avoid your patent. That gives you time to outrun them. Of course, you may also be able to block them from infringing your patent. So that's great. Even if you can't, you've done enough to slow them down, and that gives you sufficient critical room so that you can get your company to success.
Let's dive into kind of how, infringement. What does infringement mean? And how could you, as a holder of this patent, could protect your idea and ensure that your competitors aren't taking advantage of your idea?
An application is a very complex document. It has the drawings that show the invention. It also has a very long description that tells you how it works. At the end of the patent application, there's a small section called the claims. The claims are what would be enforced in a litigation. So, as I gave you an example in one of the cases where we claim three or more retainers with a sequence indication thereon. What does that mean? That means whoever infringes that patent must have at least three retainers numbered in sequence to infringe the patent. If they use only two, they don't infringe. Therefore, the practice of drafting the claim is something that is, we take the essence of the invention and then we craft the boundaries of the invention in a way that, number one, differentiates it from the prior art, what other people have done before you. Number two, it needs to be tightly written so that people will actually do the steps that you recite in the claim. So you got a balance between what it came before you versus
Hmm.
you want to capture the people who's going to practice all the limitations in your claim. For example, if the prior art was a bicycle and you invented a car, I claim the car as a vehicle with a frame with at least three wheels. And if I want to be safe, I want to throw in uh, an engine on it. Now that's distinguishing it from a bicycle because a bicycle has no engine and has only two wheels. So
Okay.
that's an example of claiming a car when the prior art is a bicycle.
I guess when you're thinking about writing a patent application, how specific do you get? Is there a danger if those three retainers in a row that are numbered and then the competitor decides to do two? Are you being too specific? Is that something you want to consider?
Yes, you want the claim to be written correctly so that you avoid the prior art. You differentiate it from the prior art, but you also want them to be as broad as possible. It is fact dependent. When you write your description, we want you to think about all variations of how can you implement this particular new design that you have, what other possible use it may have, and so when you factor those in, we have a lot of flexibility. One trick we can do is we file an application issued as a patent. And then what we do then is we file a continuation application. As long as you
Mm.
disclose subject matter that supports what I can claim, I can add claims in the future that covers variations. So if the first patent that comes out covered your product, that's called the preferred embodiment. Your competitor would look at your patent and read your patent. They say, you claim X, Y, and Z. Now I'm going to try to design around you. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z prime. But if you have stated Z prime, I can now claim X, Y, and Z prime. Therefore, having a very detailed description provides you with that flexibility.
Let's talk about how patents can affect funding for a startup. So, an asset. So let's say you're an investor. How would you look at a startup and assess their IP? How would you factor that into your decision as an investor? What do you look for?
So I would check the size of the market. Most investors prefer at least $1 billion market size. Then I would identify who's in the space and I look at their patent portfolios, compare that against the company that I've been asked to invest in. When you enter into this space, what is the likelihood that you're going to get a challenge from your competitor because they have patents? The second risk I'd be looking for is let's assume that you've managed to clear all the patents. How would you protect yourself from being copied by the competition? I would survey the known prior art and check that against the patent application claims to see if those claims are defensible. If they're not, I need to find out a strategy to do additional claims to navigate around the prior art and protect the product from being cloned by the competition. So the size of the portfolio is a factor. You as an investor would never invest only in Apple, right? You as an investor would invest
Mhm.
in a diversified portfolio, right? I understand that patents are expensive, but at least have three or four different baskets covering
Mhm.
different angles of the product. So one patent might get killed during litigation, but I still have two or three. It's a function of how well are you targeting the product and the survivability of the portfolio as a whole.
Okay. Let's dig into patents. They look towards the past. They're good at protecting an idea that you already have, but do they help guide a startup to a potential future they are looking for? What is the guarantee that a startup with a patent will continue to innovate, develop new ideas, and not just rest on their laurels?
Most companies pivot constantly to adjust to the marketplace. If you use the methodology I suggested, you're going to come up with some patents that are no longer needed while you are creating new applications that cover your path. The way to handle that is periodically go through and cull your portfolio. These patents are now covering the old path, so I'm going to sell it to somebody who could use it or license it and get royalties for that. The company needs to evolve along with its product evolution. As a result, you're going to always have some excess patents that you can monetize, use that money to continue to build your portfolio to cover where you're going. The other way is some companies might be very insightful and predict where their particular technology would be applicable in other space. Maybe the patents that they have may be related to teeth, but that same technology could be related to 3D scanning of a car component. And so they can
Hmm.
write claims to cover industrial manufacturing, even though they're in the healthcare space. You can probably find companies outside of you who aren't your competitors who would love to license the technology, and then they'll give you more money for the investment you made in patents. The insightful companies are always looking ahead and seeing what else can they use this technology for, and how can they work with other companies to maximize the value of these assets.
Have you heard of a patent thicket or a patent thicket strategy?
A patent thicket strategy means that you build a massive block of patents and then steamroll over other companies because of your mass. We've certainly seen an example of that. IBM in the past have, man, I think they have 10,000 to 15,000 patents. And they'll come to a startup and say, hey, uh, IBM knows how to make software. We have 15,000 patents. We know you infringe one of these patents somewhere. So pay up, thicket.
Okay. Okay.
And that's a strategy. If they have specific patents that IBM might be practicing, they can say, maybe you're right. Out of these 15,000, we may have some issues. But here, out of these that we have, you also probably practice those. And therefore, let's just do a cross license. So that's in a cross license, you just exchange patent.
Mm.
The way a startup would deal with a patent thicket is to have specific patents that could be used against the owners of such patent thickets.
Mhm. Now I'm curious. How does a startup research into the methods and processes that your competitor is using? For your example, how would a startup know that IBM is infringing on their patent?
You can infer that in a number of ways. You look at the product literature, you look at what they say in the press releases, also in their own patent filings. If they have a patent filing that's filed after you, I think that provides a very good reading on what they do. But it's going to be a combination of those and some know how from the people, because it's rare that you're going to find a single document generated by IBM that says, oh, yeah, we infringed this patent. A
Yeah.
number, I think you're going to have to rely on press releases, on the SEC reports, advertisements, marketing literature, and maybe some users, some customers. They
Mhm.
may have blogs or things talking about how their particular product works. So it's detective work, really, to find infringement.
Hmm. With the increasing complexity of technology, how do you foresee the new complexity of current technology? How do you see that playing into the patent system? Will it become harder? Will patents become larger to cover more specific details? How do you see the future of patents going into a more complex technical world?
That's the nature of new inventions. You're always building on top of a component. What is now the leading edge tomorrow will be used as stepping stone for the next generation. So we're used to dealing with that. What I see right now is AI is everywhere. AI is now a layer above of what other people have done. AI is used to improve ways businesses are run. In the old days, you may have automation that takes care of certain manual processes. And so that was computer automation. However, when you have AI into the whole process, you've cleaned up the entire workflow. Because of that, the market size for this increased dramatically, tenfold easily. And so that's why there's always advances built on top of prior advances and solving a bigger problem. It's a bigger market size. That's why I see a lot of investors in AI excited. They're not excited just because you're applying AI. Using AI, people now can solve a much bigger problem than before. The magnitude of the issue being solved is 10 times more than what it used to be. So they don't view companies with AI technology as a threat. They view the people who are applying AI as solving a much bigger problem that the existing company cannot solve. The valuation for the new company is much bigger than the valuation for the existing company. Technology is always a force that drives forward innovation. It's an exciting way to, for future for founders for new technology.
Okay. Let's dig into the AI segment. Let's say you are a pharmaceutical company and you are using AI to research new medicines, new drugs, therapies. Is that an idea that you would be able to patent? So, like a drug formula that has been created by AI, is that something that you as a company would be able to patent?
The patent office has said inventors need to be human. So if it's pure AI, you will not be able to patent that. In most cases, the AI simplifies a task so that it points the human to a particular new discovery faster. In the case of a drug discovery process, you have billions of compounds that could be interacting with each other. And so what AI does is they reduce that pool down to maybe a few thousand that you have to validate and experiment and find the working compounds for drugs. So AI is your wingman. It helps reduce the
Okay.
search space for the human. Once the human isolates a particular compound that is efficacious, that is the subject of a new patent application by which the human is the inventor. If a new invention is done purely by AI, you cannot get a patent on that. You can use AI tools to narrow down and improve the efficacy of the solution. That shouldn't be a problem.
What do you see as the role of AI in the patent process?
We are currently using AI in exactly the manner that we just discussed, which is AI is an enabling tool to help us cut costs and get things done quickly. AI is not allowed to run uncontrolled. Patent lawyers work by typing things into a typewriter, right? And then the computer came along and we have what is called word processor, right? And back
Mhm.
in the 60s, that was new technology. So, do you consider the word processor a form of AI where it's generating the text of the application, or is it really the work of the lawyer? As we come now to the age of AI, when it's actually generating the text, we believe that AI is just a co pilot, a wingman for lawyers, where they can deploy that to write faster, to describe the diagrams in a quicker way. But in the end, everything is controlled by a lawyer. The inventions, of course, are invented by humans. We take the drawings and the technical description by the inventor and then applying AI to organize those and then to flow, the textual flow of it, so that the English comes out much better. And that's what the large language models are really good at is they can take texts that aren't quite logical and flowing together and they can turn that into a very flowing text for people to read, and that's the strength. We use that to describe the patent application quicker and saves the client money. It enables us lawyers to focus on the strategic skills of what to think about to patent rather than the logistical skills of being a technical writer, right? That's the equivalent of telling an accountant to go back to use a calculator instead of using a spreadsheet. The accountants aren't designed to be calculators. They're there to be strategists to think about, okay, if I do it in a certain way, I'm going to save my client taxes. They're more strategic, right? The spreadsheet is simply a tool to enable them to prove their calculations and validate their thesis. So, in a way, AI is exactly the same thing. AI is simply an arm and a leg of lawyers.
Pivot to IP strategy. As a startup, what do you look at to decide where to focus your efforts first for patents?
First, we looked at the product. We asked the founders, what is your finished product? What are the features that are important to you? So once we have those milestones there, then we ask for this feature, what is the technology that's needed to provide this feature? Describe that to me. How does it work? We sequentially go through each of those features. And we overlay a big picture view of how the entire system works. By the time we're done, think of it as peeling the layers of an onion. At the top layer is the top picture view. Then you pull one layer out and you say, this is one aspect of that invention and how it works. Then you peel another layer and say, this is another way and how it works. You do that systematically, going through every feature of the product. Then we go back and say, if you had to design around what you've done, how would you do it? That covers alternative implementations. So if we have the time, we'll ask the inventor, what other industries could you use this technology in? Then we'll describe that also. You do that for every application. After a while, you have a pretty rich portfolio to work with.
Would you say there's value in startups exploring patents in multiple regions, China, the US, Japan, Europe? Is there something to be said for strategies pursuing multiple different markets with patents?
So the world is global, right? Companies no longer do everything in one country. If you look at Apple as an example, Apple sells globally, but where do they produce? They produce in China. So where's the risk? The risk is in China. But also want to cover your home base, the US, cover your major customer base. And so for them, there's Europe, China, Japan, Korea countries. I think Africa is an emerging frontier, and eventually you're going to see Africa being a big market. You may want to plant some seeds there, but right now, my guess is that the big customer bases are in Europe, Japan, Korea, and China. You want to patent where your home market is, where your big international markets are, and where you're producing your product, because that's the risk of gray market would exist.